Good morning, dear students. Now, Chapter 3, David Copperfield. We knew in Chapter 2 that David's life was totally changed by the interference of the Murdstones, Mr. Murdstone and his sister, Miss Murdstone, and that David was sent to the boarding school. Salem House. The school's name was Salem's House. The content of this chapter. David met Mr. Mell, so another new characters will appear. David's new house and his feelings. The sign, Mr. Creakle. Now, we will know some names of the teachers, we will know some names of the students, David's friends in the future, okay? Let's discuss the first point. David met Mr. Mell. Who is Mr. Mell? One of the teachers in Salem House. As I told you, David was sent all the trip, all the journey alone by himself. Mr. Parkes took him, okay, and he left him somewhere. He kept on waiting for someone who called him David Murdstone, and he didn't answer because his name was David Copperfield, okay? David Murdstone, he didn't answer. So finally he went to the one who was calling and told him, my name is David Copperfield, do you mean me? He said, yes. So Mr. Mell took David. He was a teacher or master in Salem House. He took David to his house, Mr. Mell's house, where his mother was, to spend the night and then to be sent once more to Salem House, okay, the new house, the new school, before the other students arrived 1 month earlier. Mr. Murdstone punished him by sending him to Salem House 1 month earlier than the other students. Mr. Mell, fortunately, he was kind with David, okay? The coach carried David to an inn. The inn is small hotel in the Whitechapel district, a place in England, where he was left behind. He was left alone, as I told you. Finally, Mr. Mell came to take David. Mr. Mell was a poor man, very poor man. It means that the school that David would go to is a very bad school, very poor school, who was controlled by someone we will know later on who was that man. Mr. Mell was a poor man, and that was clear from his clothes. That man was one of the teachers at Salem House, David's new school. Mr. Mell took David to his poor, cold house. He took David to the house where he used to live with his mother. That house was very poor. I want you to concentrate on that point because later on in chapter 4, we will use that point. A poor house, okay? And he introduced him to his mother, okay? A very poor woman, but she was kind. She helped David. She prepared food for him as much as she could. They had some food. Then Mr. Mell played some music on the flute, okay? He didn't know how to play a good piece of music, but he used to play some music with his flute, and David slept, okay? In the morning, David was taken to his new school and home by Mr. Mell. That school was incredibly grim looking, okay? The school was dull. the walls were brick walls, okay, without painting. The class was messy, smelly, okay. David knew that he was there during the school's holiday 1 month earlier than the other students, okay. As there were no students, he was sent as a month earlier as a punishment for what he had done to Mr. Murdstone. He was totally disappointed and sad for all the changes that happened to his life. He cried every day alone, okay? No one was in the school except Mr. Mell. He was kind to him, and the Tangay, the one who opened them the door, he was with one leg, wooden leg, okay? And that man had nothing to do with David. Mr. Mell used to spend some time with David reading, and he was very kind to him, by the way. One day, David went to the class, okay, to see the class. David went into an empty, dirty, and smelly classroom, okay, where he found a wooden sign that with the words, "Beware of him, he bites." I want you to know these words by heart. There was a wooden sign, okay, like a paper but made of wood, with these words, "Beware of him, he bites." Okay, beware of him, he bites. Okay, David thought that there was a dog. He kept on searching for the dog, but he didn't find a dog. Mr. Mell entered the class and he asked David, "What are you doing?" David told him, "I'm searching for a dog." Mr. Mell told him, "Unfortunately, this sign is not for a dog. This sign is to be put on your back." Okay, David could do nothing but accept. Okay, Mr. Mell, he hung the sign on David's back. The class, as I told you, it was dirty and smelly. Okay, mice were running in the class. He thought that there was a dog around, but Mr. Mell told him that the sign was for him. Mr. Mell apologized, he was kind, apologized for putting the sign on David's back, as there were Mr. Creakle's orders. Who is Mr. Creakle? Mr. Creakle is the owner of the school. And unfortunately, that man was Mr. Murdstone's friend. So he had the same character like Mr. Murdstone. Okay? So David left Murdstone in the house to find another Mr. Murdstone with the name of Mr. Creakle at school. David kept learning with Mr. Mell and did nothing else but listening to his music. Nothing to entertain him. Mr. Creakle, the owner of Salem House. After about a month of that, Mr. Creakle and the students started to return from the summer holiday. By the way, the school was dull. Part of that school was Mr. Creakle's house with a garden, and it was very good. Okay, he lived there with his family. And he left the school with its dirts. David met Mr. Creakle for the first time, who was heartless and rude with him. He told David that he was a friend of Mr. Murdstone. He also told David that he was a violent person. He admitted, "I'm not a good person." Okay? who hated bad boys. I hate bad boys. The first meeting, on their first meeting, he wanted to threat David and to make him feel afraid all the time. Okay? Who hated bad boys like him, like David. He pinched like this, okay, David's ears without any reason. When he saw him, he pinched his ears. They kept on talking for a while. Then David asked him to take off that sign. Please, Mr. Creakle, can I take off that sign? On that moment, Mr. Creakle jumped out of his chair, okay, frightening David so much that he ran straight back to his bed and kept crying till he slept. Okay? It means no way to remove the sign out of your bag. David lost all the hopes to take it off. The fifth point, Mr. Creakle, the owner, related to the fourth one, okay? But when the students return to school once more, the first boy to come back was Tommy Traddles, okay? Which was lucky for David because he didn't take the sign seriously. What does it mean? When Tommy Traddles returned, he made some fun with David about the sign, and that helped David not to feel ashamed of that sign. He took it easy. Okay? He told him that Mr. Creakle wasn't kind, and all of us, we know this. He usually does bad things with the students and. Okay? So David took the sign easily. Okay? The next boy to come next up was James Steerforth. A good-looking older boy who asked David if he had any money. He encouraged David to spend some of that money on treats for the other boys in their dorm room. What does it mean? When Steerforth came, he convinced David. He asked him, do you have money? He said, yes. Bigatti had already gave him some money. Yes, I have money. So give me the money to buy food for all the children to spend a good night. David accepted, and he gave him the money. They spent some of that money on treats. Treats means some food, some drinks like this. David and the other boys spent a good night together talking about the teachers at Salem House. Mr. Creakle was sure a violent master who felt happy for beating the boys. He felt very happy when he beat the boys, okay, especially the young boys, okay. By the end of this chapter, I want you to know the new characters, Mr. Mell, Mr. Creakle, Tommy Traddles, and James Steerforth. Finally, thank you for listening.